Looks great.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm Debbie Bergtholdt. I'm the manager of accommodations for Pearson VUE and the GED testing service. I do live right here in Minnesota, actually in Bloomington. So I am enjoying this awesome fall day with all of you. I hope everyone gets an opportunity to step outside and enjoy the warmth sometime today because I hear that our weather's going to change again very shortly. So thanks for being here with me. I also have Mellissa Hultstrand, your state relationship manager, with us. You're really lucky to have such a supportive person as your state relationship manager. Both Mellissa and my contact information are on my last slide. And so if you have questions today that we either don't get to, or you're mulling around and you think about it later and you're wondering about something, please don't hesitate to email either me or Mellissa or both of us. We're happy to help you. I will also provide you with our general accommodation box if you have students or advocates that need to ask an accommodation question. I'll ask that you give them that contact link rather than my personal one. But you're here with me today, and I'm very happy to hear from you directly. So we're going to talk a little bit today about disability categories, the process, documentation, and the best way you can help your students. I'll just share right here. In my opinion, we all are advocates for our students. I am an advocate for your students. Mellissa is an advocate for your students. We hope that you all are advocates for your students as well. They haven't gotten to this point without a GED or high school credential without needing some supports. And who better to help them than us, the community of us. So thank you for what you do, and let's talk about accommodations. So the purpose of accommodations is to level the playing field so people can access the exam. Unlike IDEA, where the goal is student success, under the ADA, it is access. So it's not a guarantee of an improved score, it's the ability to be able to take the test. Accommodation requests are considered on an individualized basis. We don't ever clump people together and say, oh, okay, everybody who has ADHD gets these accommodations, because many people are what we call comorbid. And so they might have ADHD, but they also have some physical chronic health condition going on as well, or some kind of a psychological condition going on. And so we look at each candidate as an individual, and we create an accommodation plan for them that meets their individual needs and for which they have documentation. And sometimes that's the hard thing, right? Particularly your candidates that have been out of school for a while, difficult for them to get updated documentation. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. Our categories of disabilities, we put into 4 categories. Now, let me please assure you that if your student applies under one, but the documentation really leads us to a different diagnosis, we would never send it back saying, oh, you applied under the wrong category. We review any paperwork that is submitted, and we make our determination based on the paperwork, not the category that they apply under. The categories are simply there to give some guidelines. So For example, learning and other cognitive disabilities. There, when you go to our website, you'll see there is several pages of documentation, guidelines for learning and other cognitive disabilities. Generally, for learning disabilities, the documentation would be a psychoeducational report. It could be an IEP or a 504 plan. Some of those are created better than others. We're looking for documentation, measures of IQ and achievement, a diagnosis, and a recommendation for the accommodations that the candidate would need to be able to access the exam. The documentation is current if it's within the last 5 years. When I say that, I should put the word generally within the last 5 years. If it's 6 years, 7 years, please encourage your student to submit it. Let my team take a look. Maybe there's enough information there that we can make an approval. If not, we'll write back to the candidate and give them some suggestions of something else that they can submit to be able to have that reviewed again. So, don't worry if it's a little more than 5 years, just send it, let my team take a look. Second category is attention deficit hyperactive disorder, ADHD or ADD. Again, documentation is valid generally if it's within the last 5 years. This documentation might be so simple as a one-page letter on letterhead from a doctor that can diagnose ADHD. It would contain the diagnosis of ADHD and make recommendations for accommodations for the test. A letter for ADHD is likely easier if your candidate has very, very old documentation. Something like ADHD documentation would likely be easier for them to secure than to get a psychoeducational report for learning disabilities. So I always like to introduce my theory of course of least resistance. Please, if your candidate has to have new testing, talk with them about what conditions they have. If they're just looking for example, more time, they just need more time because they run out of time when they take the test. They're telling you they have a learning disability, but in working with them or talking with them, you determine they do have ADHD going on as well, or they maybe have a physical disorder or chronic health condition. Both of those, a letter on letterhead from a doctor could be enough for them to get approved for extra time. So while it is absolutely true that they have a learning disability, it would be easier to get documentation of one of the other conditions that they have and be cheaper for them to get that updated documentation with the same goal. The same goal would be they need extra time. One of those other categories could allow them to get the extra time and the documentation wouldn't be so difficult to get. So just a tip to try and help your students to get the documentation that they need. Psychological and psychiatric disorders. The documentation here, we generally ask for documentation to be within the last year, and that's because these conditions very often change quickly over time. The candidates very likely are being treated by their certifying professional and can get an updated letter within the last year that has their diagnosis, the recommendation for accommodations. I do want to also, and another tip is when you have to send your students to their doctor to get documentation, make sure you empower them to say the words, please make sure the documentation is dated. That sounds so simple, but it is surprising to me how many certifying professionals don't date their documentation that they send us. So they send us a letter on letterhead, it gives a diagnosis, but it's not dated. So we don't know when that letter was written. There are times when, if they say Debbie Bergtholdt, a whatever year old female, and I can see the date of birth and I can calculate, okay, that is a current letter, we let those go. But if we cannot determine when the letter was written, then we have to send it back as incomplete and say that they need to go back to their professional and get their letter dated. So another important tip, when your students go to their doctor and ask for documentation, just empower them to say, please make sure it's dated, it has my diagnosis, and it has recommendation for the accommodations I need. Last category is physical disorders and chronic health conditions. Documentation here, again, generally is within the last year. And again, it's because those conditions can change quickly over time. Someone has a broken arm, they need someone to enter the answers for them. That broken arm is going to heal, and then they won't need that accommodation anymore. Now, the big exception to this is candidates that are blind. Of course, if they're blind, they're blind. Any documentation that they have that says the candidate is blind is acceptable to us, no matter what age it is. It is fine. It could even be for someone who is profoundly blind. It can be documentation from the teacher that Debbie is blind, and they need the accommodations to be able to access the test. Now, I'll take a second here and tell you, candidates that are blind, there are several options for them. Candidates can take the test with Braille if they are Braille users. Test comes in Braille. The candidate can use JAWS, which is Job Access with Speech. It is speech reading technology generally used by candidates that are blind, and the candidate must be a proficient JAWS user because they have to be able to navigate that software to be able to move around the test. So they need to be a proficient JAWS user, but they will tell you that they are. You'll find that out in the classroom. Or the candidate can also request a reader recorder. It is a person hired by the GED testing service, comes to the testing center, reads the material, and enters the answers into the computer in real time for the student. So the student will get their answers just like everybody else, but someone else is reading the material and putting the answers into the computer. How to request an accommodation. The first step for anybody that enters your program, I hope, is for them to create an account at GED.com. There is so much amazing information at GED.com for your students. But there is also good information about accommodations. That's where they will find that. When they create their account at GED.com, they should click yes to the question about accommodations or modified testing, I think is how it's worded. If they don't, and you've been in class with them a while and you determine that they do need to have accommodations as they're getting ready to take the exam, they can go into their GED.com account and edit their profile to change that answer from no to yes if they checked no when they started the process. And then when they're ready to apply for accommodations, because they've said yes to that question in their GED.com account, they will have a tab available to them to click on to get to our accommodation request system. Our request system is a separate portal We do that by design to keep candidates' personal identifiable information about their disabling condition separate, so no one at GED except my accommodation review team has access to that candidate's information. So nobody else will see their doctor's notes. Nobody will know what their disabling condition is, except for the people on my team who are professionals and review the documentation. It's a secure portal, password protected, and assure your students that their documentation is safe with us. Okay. And again, here it says contact. This is the first time you'll see this link, accommodations, 2 C's, 2 M's, and an S at GED.com with questions or concerns. Now, again, you guys can email me directly, and you'll see that at the end, but please have your students and advocates email there. If it is a question that my team determines needs my attention, we have a flagging system in our email box, and they'll just flag it to me, and I send replies out of that box every day. This has been a while now, but maybe some of you haven't heard, effective August of 2023, 2 years ago already, accommodation approvals became valid for 2 years rather than a year. So previous to that, every year people would have to request accommodation approval again. Now that approval for almost all situations is valid for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, your candidate can still submit an extension request, and we will reevaluate. And if we can extend the approval, it would get extended for another 2 years. So what that means for you and your students is there is no downside to starting the process early. Get that request for accommodations in as soon as your student identifies that they are going to need accommodations on the test, even if it's going to be 6 months or more before they're even ready to consider taking a test. Allow my team to review the request. There might be some back and forth with the student. There's no stress then. The student can get additional documentation if needed. The approval will go into their GED.com account as approved accommodations only. And what that approval is, that approval is portable then, because if your student leaves Minnesota and, maybe moves to Florida or someplace warm, they just get tired of the winter we have coming up. When they get to Florida and get ready to take GED tests there, they will still take them under their GED.com account, and it will reflect that approval for the 2 years that it's valid. So encourage them to start that process early. Just a couple things here. What's not considered a disability, non-native English speakers, so ESL students. Under the ADA, ESL is considered a life circumstance, not a disability. But I encourage you to not stop there with your students. If you have ESL students that are preparing to take the GED test and they feel they need accommodations, the fact that they're ESL, that is, again, a life circumstance, but talk with them about what other conditions they have going on. Is it possible they might have a learning disability? Is it possible they might have a physical chronic health condition that they could get documentation for? Is it possible they have psychological psychiatric disorder, post-traumatic stress, something like that, that they could get documentation for that? I think sometimes these students say, well, English isn't my first language, so I need extra time. And unfortunately, when they're told, well, you can't have extra time for that, then they think that's the end of it. But I encourage you to work with those students and determine if there's some other way. Again, getting in that back door and finding some other way for us to approve them for the extra time that they might need. Okay. The other thing I want to call attention here is test anxiety. Um, Test anxiety is not considered a disabling condition. However, generalized anxiety is. So here's another opportunity for you to work with your student and empower them with the right words when they go visit their doctor. I see it all the time. We get letters from doctors that say, Debbie has test anxiety and is getting ready to take the GED test, therefore give her some extra time. It's because when I went to the doctor, that's what I said. I'm getting ready to take the GED exam and I'm anxious already. I just need some extra time to take it. They need to say to their doctor, would you test me for generalized anxiety? Because generalized anxiety is considered a disability under the ADA. So their doctor will do some assessment on them to determine are they anxious in other situations, when they drive their car, when they're in a group of people, when they're at the grocery store, whatever the situation is. If the doctor can determine that their diagnosis truly is generalized anxiety, they can write that letter, remember, dated, on letterhead, with the diagnosis of generalized anxiety and a recommendation for the accommodations the student needs to be able to access the test. So just another tip there. I get it. Students don't know the difference, and the doctors don't know the difference either. And they listen to the candidate, their patient, and they write the letter accordingly. So let's empower your students to have the right words to say to their doctor so that they can get their approval first time around. Mellissa, is there anything in the chat I need to know before I go on?
Debbie, so Brian Miller had a question. If the ADHD diagnosis was more than 5 years old, do they need to get re-diagnosed? For example, if we have a 30-year-old student with IEP records from their schooling, would they need additional documentation?
Yeah, if they're 30, their documentation is likely 18, well, no, 12, 13, 14 years old. So they would need additional documentation. But, if the candidate is getting medication for their ADHD now, then it's just a matter of going in and saying, hey, I'm getting ready to take the GED test. Can you write me a letter with my diagnosis and recommendations for testing? So, but yes, that one, it would be too old for us to be able to accept that. Thank you.
And yeah, and just one more question. If a student has accommodations marked on their account, but their accommodations approval has passed the 2-year mark, and they do not want to update their documentation, can they take the test without any accommodations? They can, right?
Well, they can, but it's kind of interesting because in GED Manager, that accommodation flag stays
Mhm.
flipped.
Right.
And so they do have to write to us and say, my accommodations have expired. I do not want to renew them. Please remove the accommodation approval from my account. And, that's sort of, it's six of one, half dozen of the other, which way we go. And GED has decided to leave the flag on there with the thought that many candidates need that accommodation through their testing life. And so we want them to ask for an extension. But if they choose to not do them, absolutely. It's just simple to write in and say, please cancel my accommodation, and we'll flip the flag on their GED. It usually just takes a day or two for us to do that. And again, they can email accommodations@ged.com and ask us to do that. It's
Okay.
really helpful when your students write to us like that, that they put their name and their GED ID. That is so helpful. So many people have common names. If we put it into GED, we get 8 hits, and it's difficult to know who it is. So if they put their name and their GED ID first time they email us, then we'll just take care of that in a day or two for them. Okay.
And that's all for questions. And just in terms of a time check, we're at 11:27.
Okay. Thank you. Commonly requested accommodations. Candidates should always request the accommodations they feel they need to access the test. We do not provide a full list. It would be we are unable in today's world to do that because there are so many things we could approve. If your student feels they need an accommodation and they have documentation to support it, please encourage them to submit a request for it. Common ones are extra time. On the GED, it's 25/50 or 100% extra time. Stop the clock breaks, 30 minutes of testing with a 5-minute break, or 45 minutes of testing with a 10-minute break. I will tell you, if your candidate wants to get up, go out of the room, have a bio break, they should, if at all possible, do the 45 minutes of testing with a 10-minute break. 5 minutes isn't very long to be able to get up, get out, do a bio break, and get back in. And at the end of 5 minutes, the test will start again. And so you don't want them to lose testing time. So sometimes the 5-minute break is fine if someone has maybe ADHD and they just need a refocusing break every once in a while. And they're going to sit at their desk. They just want time to just look around or close their eyes or whatever. The 5-minute is fine. But I encourage you to talk with your student about the 10-minute just being more practical to be able to get up out of their seat. Reader recorder, we talked about that. Not only candidates that are blind, but there are candidates that might have a learning disability that require a reader. There are students, we talked about the person who maybe has a broken arm. They need somebody to just sit and record the answers in the computer for them. Those can either be one person to read, we can approve a person to record, or we approve, again, one person that does both functions. They read the material and they enter the answers into the computer for your student. If a reader recorder is approved, almost without exception, we approve double time for the student. Sometimes they don't think about, well, they should ask for extra time. My team just adds it. It takes extra time. Can you repeat that section? Can you, the back and forth that the student has with the reader recorder can consume extra time. So we generally approve 100% extra time for that. And we always approve a separate room so that the student can talk with the reader recorder and it doesn't interrupt other people in the testing room. So we approve a separate room. We generally approve the 45 minutes of testing with a 10-minute break in those situations as well, because the student does a lot of active listening, and whether they think about it or not ahead of time, when they get into the test, it's really exhausting to do that much listening. So they need those 10-minute breaks, and it is difficult to read that amount without having a little break, get a drink of water, those kinds of things. So it is good for the reader recorder as well to have those breaks, but it's mostly for the student just to have a little bit of downtime from that active listening. Candidates also, for separate rooms, might have a condition that requires a separate room. Some candidates with ADHD ask for a separate room. Other candidates say, oh, no, no, that would be really distracting to me. It would be too quiet. Please don't put me in a separate room. So again, individualized. We try to approve the accommodations the candidate feels they need to access the test. A separate room can also be for things like candidates that maybe have Tourette's syndrome and they have involuntary speech tics that would be embarrassing and disruptive to students in the main room. So we put them in a separate room. Our documentation guidelines, if you go to GED.com, you will be able to find the accommodation tab there, and the accommodation guidelines are there. So take a look at those there. Just so people here know, in Minnesota, January through October in 25, so this year, we've already had 153 requests for accommodations. So good job, you guys. You're doing a great job advocating with your students. 143 of them have been approved or partially approved. Only 7 were found incomplete. And remember, if it's incomplete, we give them suggestions of additional documentation to submit so that we can review it again and hopefully turn that into an approval. There were 3 that were denied this year. Generally, those are ones that candidates ask for something that just isn't possible. For example, making the test reduced number of answer choices, or once in a while people will request waiving a module. Well, you all know everyone must take and pass all 4 modules of the test. So it is very rare. As you see, the last 2 years you had nobody denied. This year you did have 3, but it's very unusual and very exceptional reasons for a denial. Our accommodations go through our online request system. It's very efficient. It is secure. The best thing is when your student applies and they've completed the application process, they get an immediate response from us. We've received your request. Requests can take up to 30 calendar days for a review and determination. I will tell you our average turnaround is about 12 or 13 days. So again, start the process as early as possible because you just don't know how long it might take. But if all of a sudden somebody needs an accommodation and they didn't disclose, please just submit it, and we do say it could take up to 30 days, but I can assure you in most cases it takes less. I will also tell you, if you have a situation where a candidate has an extenuating circumstance and you really need to get their request reviewed in a few days, they suddenly have to move to a new state, or something happens and you really want to get them tested before they're out of your program, email me directly, and you'll see my thing at the end here. Or you can even email accommodations@ged.com and say, Debbie said we could ask to have one expedited, and I will absolutely expedite it for you. Now, I can't expedite them all, but if you have a genuine reason for someone getting an expedited review, please let me know. We're happy to help you with that. And then web scheduling, candidates generally can schedule on the web. The reasons they wouldn't be able to is if they have something that has what we call manual intervention. So they need a separate room or they need assistive personnel, that reader recorder. Those require the candidate to wait for the scheduling team to call them back. So those do not have, those require a phone call and they won't have first call first call resolution. Um, your student doesn't have to worry because on the letter that we send them, we tell them what their next step is. So we say to schedule your exam, go to GED.com and schedule it for all of those that are web schedulable. If it requires them to call in to the scheduling team to schedule, we'll put that in the letter. Your next step is to call 1-800-466 to schedule an exam. So it's, if they're not sure what to do, encourage them to go back to the letter they received from us, and that will give them scheduling instructions. Just a couple things here. Universal access features. These are available to all students, do not require an accommodation approval. Candidates can increase the font size on their test. Any candidate can do it up to 18-point font. It is a tab at the top of their screen. They can also change their screen color. For example, from white screen to a black screen with white writing. They can do a blue screen with yellow writing. There are about 10 or 11 options of screen choices. Those they can find at GED.com. There's a section there that tells them what those options are, if something like that would be helpful to them. And then there is a highlighting tool available to all students as well. Those are called always on features or universal access features. They're available to all candidates. They do not require an accommodation. If your student needs their font larger than 18-point font, then we have Zoom text available. If your student uses Zoom text, they will know to ask for Zoom text. Zoom text does require an accommodation approval, so they would have to submit a request for us for Zoom text. Zoom text would blow the size of the screen up much larger than 18-point font if they need that. And then they can zoom back and forth, smaller, larger, if they want to hone in on, for example, a chart or graph or something. So that's available to them. Adaptive equipment, we have a lending library of equipment available. If your student is approved for a specialty mouse or ergonomic keyboard of some kind, we have that equipment available. We ship it once your student is scheduled for an exam. We ship the equipment. It happens automatically. We get pinged that the student is scheduled at such and such a test center. We ship the equipment. The test center administrator plugs it in. Candidate sits down. They're magically their special keyboard is there and they're able to test with it. At the end of the test administrator takes that equipment off, puts it back in the box and ships it back to us, and we have it ready for the next person that needs it. We've already talked about JAWS.
Debbie, I just wanted to let
Yes,
you know we have 5 minutes
5 minutes.
left.
I know. Thanks. Here, the one thing I'll talk about is accommodations versus security. It wasn't that long ago when we would say cell phones are absolutely not allowed in test centers. In today's world, many people use their cell phones to be able to monitor their glucose if they have diabetes. And so they need to have that phone with them because that's what pairs to tell them if they have a sugar issue going on. So we have created protocols for that. The candidate does need to request an accommodation approval for bringing their cell phone in. We approve them for a separate room and their cell phone, and then the TAs have protocols that they use for the student, but they can bring them in. It must have prior approval. Um, just some outer limits. The time, 100% extra time is the most time available. It is not possible to have an untimed test, and of course, not possible to waive that math test. But I do want to talk about medical cares. If your student needs to have a personal care attendant, a PCA, attend with them either to sit in the waiting room, which does require an accommodation approval. Otherwise, no one is allowed in the testing center. But if they need someone to sit there in case there's an emergency, or even they're so brittle they need to have their PCA sit in the testing room with them, we can make that happen. So they should apply for an accommodation, and we will work with them to make sure that that happens and they are safe. I do just want to mention that candidates should never think that the TA can assist. The only thing a TA could do in an emergency is pick up the phone and call 911. They cannot offer medical cares to anyone, as you can imagine. And then, how can you help your student? We have a comfort aid list. When you go to GED.com, look for that. There are some lower cost testing clinics. There are not very many of them. If the one thing I can suggest is working with community organizations in your community to see if perhaps they would help fund testing for your students. I know that part is difficult. If you have more questions about that, reach out to me. We're down to our 2 minutes here. 45 minutes is a short time frame for me. So if there's things I've missed today, please, please, please reach out to me. Resources on the accommodation page, the frequently asked questions, and then we talked about these other two. Some scheduling information. A separate room approval requires a callback. Readers require 8 business day lead because we have to work with our third-party vendor to schedule that. If there's no answer when the agent calls back and they're unable to leave a message, an email will be sent to the candidate's email. But if your student calls in to schedule and they're told they have to get a call back, please, for the next 2 days, tell them they need to answer their phone when it rings. Otherwise, at the end of 2 days, if an offer was made and they don't hear back, that offer goes away and your student has to start over again. So it's really important that they answer so that they can get that. And candidates and advocates should not call the test center directly. They should call the scheduling number for assistance. And here's the last slide. Here's my personal email. I think we'll be able to get these slides to you somehow, but if you want to take a picture of this one would be helpful maybe for you. And I have to stop there.
Well, and thank you, Debbie. And these slides I've already placed in a PDF copy in the participant folder that you guys can access from your agenda. So after all the sessions, there's a participant folder found here. You'll also, and you can just click on it, it opens, and you just go to GED Accommodations session to find those PDFs. Again, when I send out an email after today with my evaluation, I'll also link to the participant folder so everybody can access that, as well as our YouTube channel where you can see the recorded sessions. So thank you guys. Thanks, Mellissa. Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Laura, for your
Thank
help.
you so much, Rachel and
Yeah.
Laura. We appreciate it. Thank you to all the attendees too. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yep. And I will be stopping the recording shortly. Actually, I guess I could do it now. But also this next hour we have a break for lunch. So our next session starts at 1 o'clock. Okay, thank you.
Bye.